Good evening. It is lovely to see you all. And how excited are you to find out what is happening in the final episode of Daniel's Dreams Monster Mountain? I've been thinking about it all day. What is going to happen to Daniel and to Shelley too? So, without further ado, I think we should get going. Now, we're actually up to chapter 6. We are in this together. Okay. So, are we ready? Are we getting all snuggled on down ready? I am. Here we go. Shelley and Daniel were nearing the village and could see the campfire burning. The glow of yellow, orange and red was beautiful against the darkness of the night. Daniel felt a tingle from his head to his toes. This village made him feel so much better. He didn't feel scared or worried to be around monsters. He thought about all the times he had assumed monsters were mean and scary. How wrong he had been to have assumed that. Just because they were different, he had been afraid. Now, in the moment, he realised he had been wrong to judge. Yes, some of them had more than 2 eyes, which meant they looked different to what he was used to, but it also meant that they had excellent vision. Daniel chuckled to himself, thinking how useful it would be to have more than 2 eyes, especially when trying to keep an eye on Darcy. Having more than 2 eyes must be a great security system. You could literally see anything coming. And as all of us adults often say when little ones are playing or getting up to mischief, we say, I've got eyes in the back of my head. Just like Daniel's monsters. It's so strange that you don't have any slime on you, Shelley told Daniel. Did you know that having slime helps you do loads of things, like catch food if it falls, or to quickly fix something if it breaks? No need to play hunt the glue. And the monsters with loads of fingers, they are the best at maths. I can imagine, Daniel nodded. We are like you humans in that we all have our own differences, but we are all caring and kind and sometimes a bit funny too. Shelley said, look how kind everyone was to encourage me to go to the meeting today. They didn't give up on me. Daniel felt all warm inside. It was a wonderful feeling to think of everyone as being totally accepted. He thought about people in his own world. They were the same, kind, funny, and caring too. The other monsters noticed that Daniel and Shelley were on their way back, and they began to cheer and wave. Daniel gave a little wave, and Shelley offered a shy smile. Daniel thought this was all she could offer at this time because she was probably worrying about standing up in front of everyone. The monsters started to sit back down as Daniel and Shelley entered the circle to take their seats around the campfire. Daniel cleared his throat, stood up and began to speak. He could see every eye on him as the monsters waited patiently, ready to listen. This was his moment to practice. He took a deep breath, imagined the peace from the gardens filling his body and began. The Tudor period is dated between 1485 and 1603. This was when the Tudors were the ruling family in England. The first Tudor monarch was King Henry VII, who claimed the throne when his forces defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. He ruled until his death in 1509. The whole campfire was deadly silent as everyone listened to every word that fell from Daniel's mouth. Once he stopped talking, the monsters clapped and cheered. Hooray! Daniel could hear shouts of "Way to go" and "Well done." being shouted from round the campfire. He had managed it. He had done what he needed to do, and he felt good. He felt proud and excited. That was great. Dex's voice was louder than the others. I had no idea what you were talking about, but it sounded very impressive. When Shelley and I spoke, Daniel explained, she gave me permission to tell you all how she had been feeling. She was upset and worried about standing up in front of us all here today. The feeling she gets when she must talk in front of everyone makes her worried. It's not something that she likes, and sometimes it makes her sad. Her hands get sweaty and she doesn't think she will be able to do it. That is why she ran away. She was overwhelmed with how she felt, and it all became too much for her. The truth is, I feel like this too when I have to talk to people. Both Shelley and I had a chat in the gardens about ways to deal with feelings of worry and our lack of self-belief. So Shelley has come back and has decided to overcome her fears and worries and talk to all of us. I think she is very brave. Daniel stood quietly for a moment to allow the monsters time to think about what he had said. As he waited, a feeling of pride came over him. He had just stood up in front of a group of monsters and had spoken to them. He had remembered his lines perfectly. No fear, no worries, no butterflies. He thought about how he had taken a deep breath before he spoke, how he had thought about the tranquility of the gardens and how they had made him feel at peace. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't alone. He wasn't worrying anymore. The last time he had felt the butterflies was in the garden with Shelley. Maybe they had left his belly with the beautiful flowers. And look, here's Dex, Shelley, and Daniel, and they are all so happy now. Daniel thought about how, if he could do this here, then he could do it with his assembly too. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Shelley taking a deep breath and exhaling. Come on, Shelley, you can do it. We believe in you, Shelley, and go for it, Shelley, could be heard around the campfire as their monster friends all offered their encouragement and support to her. Shelley stood up, took her place in front of the monsters, and began to talk. I was going to tell you about my week, but instead I want to say thank you for always supporting me and believing in me, for encouraging me to come to the meeting and always offering your support. Friends can really help you overcome your problems. What Daniel said is true. I do worry about talking in front of you all. I worry I will say something wrong, or I will make a mistake, or fall over, or... Shelley tried to continue her long list of worries, but then she heard Ruby say, I think we all feel like that at times, but we are your friends and we want to listen to you and we want to help you. I know, and that is what Daniel said. I want to thank you for being patient and listening, and to Daniel for helping me overcome some of my worries. I'd like to help him too, Shelley stated. Daniel smiled at Shelley. You've overcome your mountain, Shelley. How lovely is the view, Daniel whispered into her ear. Shelley stood for a moment as the realization of climbing to the top of her mountain hit her. She was overwhelmed with how proud she felt, how the climb up the mountain had been a real struggle, but how incredible the view was from the top. This time, the sense of being overwhelmed was a positive one. She felt amazing to have reached the top of her mountain. Daniel has an assembly at school tomorrow and he is feeling a little nervous. Is there anyone who could offer some ideas of how he could overcome his worries? Shelley asked the group. Everyone was stunned by how confident Shelley sounded. I think Daniel needs to believe in himself more. He has just spoken in front of all of us, and he was amazing, said Ruby. Maybe he could do some deep breaths like he taught you, suggested Slick. How about he thinks of all of us, standing, talking to us today, offered Dex. Daniel was listening carefully and nodding at the suggestions. He should also share his worries with people he cares about, said Charm. I think that really helps. Daniel looked around at all the monsters who were willing to offer him help, half of whom he hadn't even met properly yet. He realised that they wanted him to succeed, not fail. They wanted to help and be his friends. Daniel was surprised by the gentle chant that started around the campfire. Daniel can do it, Daniel can do it, Daniel can do it. The chant became louder and louder. Daniel jumped up from his seat and shouted, I can do it! Everyone cheered. Daniel proudly walked back to his seat next to Shelley and sat down around the campfire. He had done it, and he felt proud. A variety of hands touched his back as they congratulated him on overcoming his fear. Some monsters stood up and high-fived Shelley and Daniel. He turned to Shelley and hugged her, whispering, "Thank you," in her ear. "You helped me too," she replied. "How do you feel now?" asked Daniel. "Like I can overcome anything with my friends by my side. How about you?" she questioned. "Well, I think the butterflies have finally flown away from my belly," Daniel said with a smile. "That's good. How do you feel about the assembly tomorrow?" Shelley asked. "I think I can do it. I will be nervous, but I think they will be good nerves," Daniel said with confidence. "Someone once told me, I think it might be true, that when the rain comes down, the sun appears soon too." Shelley smiled at Daniel, acknowledging what he had said to her earlier on their way back from the garden. The atmosphere around the campfire was lively and happy. The monsters began to return to their seats. Dex had caught their attention, and everyone settled down to listen. Daniel felt happy. He knew he had friends here. He wasn't alone anymore, and he wasn't afraid. Daniel knew that no matter what the problem, they were all in this together. He wriggled in his seat to get comfy, looked up at Dex, and smiled. Chapter 7. It's called Just Breathe. And here, I think these three are ending up really good friends, don't you? I sure do. So, I think we'll get on to Chapter 7, which is called Just Breathe. Okay? Chapter 7. Dex stood up and gave a thumbs up to Daniel. "So, I think it is really wonderful that Shelley and Daniel were able to overcome their fears and share their feelings. Lots of us can sometimes feel nervous or worried. How about we all share how we feel after we've told someone about our worries? Anyone want to start?" Dex questioned. Hands flew up in the air, and slime from some of the monsters flung around the campfire. Some of the monsters licked it off their bodies, whilst others looked disgusted at it. Daniel smiled as he wiped a dollop of red slime from his rosy red cheeks. He had never had slime slung about in class when his classmates put their hands up, so this was quite different. "When I tell people how I feel, it makes whatever was on my mind feel less daunting," exclaimed Charm. "I like it when I confess about a worry and people offer suggestions I hadn't thought about," Dex added. "Sometimes just saying it helps me to see it from a different angle," Ruby said, "and makes me feel less alone." "It's great that sharing our feelings can make us all feel so much better," Dex said. How about we all give Daniel some quick tips for his assembly tomorrow? I would suggest focusing on one thing in the audience, Bessie suggested with her head facing downwards. You should try to believe in yourself and think about other times when you've overcome something, shouted a monster on the other side of the circle. Remember that everyone wants to see you succeed, Dex added, and imagine those butterflies flying away. What about thinking about a calm place or an object that makes you feel calm, said a quiet voice from the other side of the fire. Try not to overthink things or think things that you don't know are true, Ruby said confidently. Always try your best, and no one can ask any more of you than that, suggested Slick. There have been some fantastic suggestions from everyone about how we can deal with our butterflies in our bellies from now. We have seen tonight how Shelley and Daniel have overcome their fears. I think that is enough for everyone tonight, and we will bring our meeting to a close. Let's take a moment before we all leave to just take a deep breath, Dex said. Well done. Daniel thought about all the suggestions that the monsters had come up with and how they could be applied to his life. It felt good to know he wasn't alone in what he had been feeling. Although the monsters looked so vastly different, they were so alike in their feelings and how they dealt with things. He wished that humans could be as patient as the monsters, though. As the meeting ended, the embers of the fire began to burn low. Some of the monsters began to chatter amongst themselves, whilst others started to stand up to make their way to their houses. Daniel wondered what it would be like to live in one of the monster houses and if he could ever get to visit one. He hoped it would be soon. Dex and Daniel knew it was time to return to his own world. He remembered the monster from earlier who had been wiping away a tear and blowing her nose. He looked around for her and saw that she was smiling and looking much happier. Daniel, I think it's time you went back to your world, Dex interrupted Daniel's thoughts. I think you're right. I have my assembly to get ready for, Daniel agreed. You'll be back again soon, won't you, Daniel? Dex asked. I do hope so. I can't wait to see what adventures I can go on with all of you. We are friends now, monster friends, Dex said as he wiggled his little finger as a symbol that Daniel was now part of their group. Daniel said his goodbyes and promised them he would visit again if he could. Above Monster Mountain, Daniel could see the morning glow was rising in the distance. The air seemed cool and the morning mist glistened upon the glorious green grass. The birds were chirping sweetly in the uniquely shaped trees. Day was breaking and it was time for Daniel to return to his world and for the monsters to return to their homes and rest their tired heads. Dex walked with Daniel up the hill to take him to his bedroom. Daniel felt sad that he was leaving Monster Mountain and the new friends he had met. His adventure with the monsters felt different, more meaningful than anything he had ever experienced in any of his dreams before. Daniel had a feeling this wouldn't be the last time he saw his monster friends. Dex held Daniel's hand and said, "Close your eyes and take a breath." Then he started to whisper, "Before you go, you must know we're here for you wherever you go. Say goodbye until we meet. Your help tonight is now complete. Take a breath and close your eyes. Make a wish and you will fly. Back to your bed you will go, safe and warm in the nighttime glow." Daniel closed his eyes and the darkness took him. Daniel awoke. He sat up and looked around. He was back in his own bed, in his own room, in his own house. He was already excited to tell Darcy about his dream. Daniel climbed out of bed, already anticipating what might happen in the dreams tonight, and he couldn't help but smile. For now he needed to get ready for school and tackle his very own mountain, the school assembly. Chapter 8. Daniel's Mountain. Daniel rushed into the bathroom to get himself ready for school. He looked at himself in the mirror, said, "You can do this, Daniel," wiped his face and eagerly walked out of the bathroom. "Darcy, Darcy, breakfast!" Mum shouted up the stairs. Daniel bounced down each step, eager to get the day started. Darcy followed shortly after, moaning about something to do with her teddy bears not giving her enough room in bed last night. Darcy always woke up looking like she had been through a bush. Her hair stuck up, she had dribble marks on her face, and she looked grumpy. Daniel often wondered what adventures she must go on in her dreams to look like that in the morning. He hoped one night she would visit a hairdresser on her adventures. This was just the way she looked every morning, and Daniel knew that she wasn't a morning person. He was lucky to get a grunt out of her in the morning. "Morning, you two," Mum said. "Morning, Mum," replied Daniel. "Morning, Mummy," Darcy grumbled. "We all set for school this morning?" Dad asked as he sipped his tea. "I sure am," Darcy nodded. "Me too," said Daniel. Mum seemed surprised at how excited and lively Daniel was feeling about the assembly. It wasn't like him, but she was pleased to see he was embracing that butterflies can sometimes be good feelings too. They sat as a family of four, eating their breakfast, drinking their morning drink and talking about their days ahead. Daniel recalled the family meal last night and how differently he had felt then. He'd been anxious and afraid, too worried to even eat. He looked at each of his family members and thought about how normal they were compared to his monster friends in his dreams last night. He missed their uniqueness, and just as he was about to tell Darcy about them, Mum interrupted his thoughts. "Are you ready for the assembly today, Daniel?" "Yeah, I still feel a little nervous, but I'm just going to take a few deep breaths and try my best," Daniel said. "That's a great attitude, son." Dad sounded proud. "We can't wait to see you," Mum said. Butterflies began to flutter in Daniel's tummy. These were excited butterflies. He'd never been excited about an assembly before. "Let's go, everyone. In the car," Mum shouted. Darcy and Daniel arrived at the school playground, happy and eager to see their friends. They liked school, Daniel more than Darcy. As soon as they reached the gates, they ran off to their friends who were shouting their names. Mum called after them, "See you in there, Daniel." "Darcy, be good for Mrs. Postlethwaite." A loud ringing sound echoed across the playground, and each child filed into their class lines like soldiers being called to attention. And there are the children being dropped off at school by Mum. Daniel looked back at his mum for one last moment of reassurance. She put her thumb up and smiled. Daniel gave a shy smile and walked into class. "Right, everyone, remember your places and do your best," Mr. Grizzly, their teacher, directed. Daniel and the rest of his class were the first in the hall. This was always the way. When it was someone's assembly, the hall seemed bigger. Daniel looked around and felt a flutter in his stomach. He took a moment to himself to remember what he had learned from the monsters. He knew the butterflies were coming back, but he also knew how to control them now. He took some deep breaths, thought about what he wanted to say, and remembered he could only try his best. He knew the butterflies were nice feelings too, and he thought back to how good he felt last night talking in front of the monsters. Luke leant over and whispered, "I'm a little nervous." "Me too," said Daniel. "Me three," echoed Joe. "Nerves can be a good thing too, though," Daniel whispered to his friends. This made Daniel realise that he wasn't alone in what he was feeling. Just as the monsters had said last night, he leant over to his friends and said, "Take a deep breath and do your best." They all smiled at each other and faced forward. He looked around the hall at the colours on the wall. He said each colour to himself in his head, just as he and Shelley had done the night before with the butterfly, looking for different colours and repeating them to himself as he waited. It made him calm and happy. He hummed the colours of the rainbow song to himself. Parents filed into the hall, and there were echoes of conversation bouncing off the walls as parents settled into their seats. There were screams and cries as younger children waited impatiently for the assembly to start. Daniel could see his parents trying to quieten down the younger children, usually with something to eat. The rest of the school started to pile in and sit in long rows according to their classes. Daniel spotted Darcy in the crowd and she beamed with pride. Her smile reached from ear to ear as she was about to watch her big brother have his moment. The crowd settled down and a deafening silence fell as the head teacher walked into the hall. This was it. This was Daniel's moment to climb his mountain. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the assembly of the Sycamore class. Daniel's class began their assembly, which was about the Tudors. Daniel listened intently as the other members of his class all took their turns. He noticed some had trembling hands, others spoke with confidence, and some stumbled a little over their words. Everyone in the audience smiled. Daniel continued to take some deep breaths, focused on his parents in the crowd, and stood up to say his part. The Tudor period is dated between 1485 and 1603. This was when the Tudors were the ruling family in England. The first Tudor monarch was King Henry VII, who claimed the throne when his forces defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. He ruled until his death in 1509. Daniel was clear and calm as he spoke. He returned to his seat, feeling a sense of overwhelming pride that he had managed to say his part and enjoyed doing it. He thought back to how he had taken deep breaths and focused on his parents in the audience. The exact advice the monsters had offered him and Shelley the previous evening. So here he is, really focusing on his parents in the audience, speaking clearly and calmly. The assembly continued, but Daniel was lost in thought. His mind wandered to Dex, Shelley, Ruby, and all the others. He couldn't wait to return to see them. He was desperate to tell them all about his assembly and how he used their advice to help him get over his very own mountain. He hoped he would get to visit them again that evening and share his success with them. From the top of his mountain, he could see endless happy faces, and it felt amazing. People were proud of him, and this was the best view he could possibly have seen, their happiness and his own. The end. Oh, wow. I feel so proud. I feel like Daniel's mummy. I feel so proud of him. Do you too? Didn't he do wonderful? And what wonderful hints and tips for us when we're feeling nervous and really quite frightened of something we need to do. But we'll all remember those things, won't we? And try them next time we have butterflies in our tummy. So a huge thank you to Leanne for writing this wonderful book that will help us all. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed reading it. Take care, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure. Night, night. And as usual, love you all to bits. Sleep tight.